The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare tells the true story of Operation Postmaster, a British operation that was carried out during World War II, which found a small group of commandos attempting to capture 3 ships that were being used in the Axis war effort. The ships, which included the merchant vessel Duquesa d'Aosta, were located in the harbor of Santa Isabel on the West African island of Fernando Po, which was then a Spanish colony. Like in the movie, Spain was neutral in the war at this time, and for Britain to pull off such a risky operation was certainly a bold endeavor, because if they were discovered, it would draw plenty of condemnation. At the beginning of the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, which was directed by Guy Ritchie, we see the words "based on a true story" come up on the screen. However, in this video, I'm going to explain why a more apt label is loosely inspired by a true story. This is the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, History versus Hollywood. The covert British unit that carries out the raid in the movie were known as the No. 62 Commando, or the Small Scale Raiding Force, which was founded by Major Gus March-Phillips, who is portrayed by Henry Cavill in the film. The unit was part of the Special Operations Executive, which was established by Prime Minister Winston Churchill in 1940 to carry out sabotage, espionage, and reconnaissance missions in Nazi-occupied Europe. Essentially, this was one of the earliest forms of modern Black Ops warfare, which came to include the British SAS. Now, despite only one mission being focused on in the film, the Special Operations Executive consisted of more than 13,000 people and carried out hundreds of operations during the course of the war. And the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare isn't the first film to focus on one of those operations. Operation Anthropoid was the subject of a 2016 film starring Cillian Murphy and Jamie Dornan. It focused on a mission to assassinate a high-ranking Nazi named Reinhard Heydrich. Perhaps the first inaccuracy to note in the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare is that the entire operation appears to take just a matter of weeks. However, in real life, it actually took several months. The small-scale raiding force set out for West Africa on the 65-ton Brixham yacht trawler Maid of Honor on August 9, 1941. However, they didn't complete the objective of the mission, stealing the 3 ships, until January 14, 1942, 5 months later. Part of the reason it took so long to carry out the mission in real life is because the British commanding officer in the area of West Africa refused to support the mission. Britain's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as the British Embassy in Madrid, were also against it as they were concerned about the reaction from the Spanish government. As seen in the film, the leader of the small-scale raiding force, Gus March-Phillips, did pick most of his team members. Like most of the characters in the film, Henry Cavill's character is an exaggerated version of the real Gus March-Phillips. In an interview with comicbook.com, Henry Cavill commented on the fictionalization of his character, saying, "There's not a huge amount written about these guys because they were obviously fairly secret squirrel types. We just kind of created this hyperbolic version of this character to fit into this movie." In the Guy Ritchie movie, Gus March-Phillips is portrayed as a sort of Rambo meets James Bond character, harboring the toughness and indestructibleness of the former and the quips of the latter. One of the things that the movie doesn't tell you is that Gus March-Phillips was actually one of the main inspirations for Ian Fleming's James Bond character. Ian Fleming was involved in the planning of Operation Postmaster, and the movie conveniently places him under the command of General Colin McVean Gubbins, portrayed by Cary Elwes. However, in real life, Fleming was under the command of Rear Admiral John Godfrey, not Gubbins. Like in the movie, Colin McVean Gubbins controlled the Special Operations Executive. His nickname was indeed M, and he was the inspiration for the James Bond character. Early in the movie, Gus March-Phillips and his band of ungentlemanly fighters have to rescue fellow soldier Jeffrey Appleyard, portrayed by Alex Pettyfer, from torture on a Nazi base. To free him, they killed dozens of enemy soldiers in one of the film's bloodiest sequences. There is no mention of this rescue in Damian Lewis's book. Co-screenwriter Urash Amel told USA Today that there was an event that inspired this fictional rescue of Appleyard. However, the real-life event involved no bloodshed. In fact, not a single shot was fired. 4 or 5 soldiers arrived, and the Nazis, some of whom were showering, all gave up immediately. Amel says that one even fainted. So basically, there was a rescue that looked nothing like the one in the film that very loosely inspired it. And I don't even believe that rescue involved Appleyard. It seems like that was a separate rescue carried out by the Special Operations Executive. So you might be wondering, if there was a real-life rescue that loosely inspired it, but there was no violence, did Anders Lassen really cut an enemy soldier's heart out and hold it in his hand, as Alan Ritchson's character does in the film? That scene is fictional as well. Anders Lassen holding a dead German soldier's heart in his hand was the idea of actor Alan Ritchson, who conceived it as a way to convey how much the real Lassen hated Nazis. Ritchson reportedly did his homework on Lassen, reading about 4 books on the highly decorated Danish soldier. The actor also became proficient with a bow and arrow. That leads me to the next question that I had after seeing the film. Did Anders Lassen use a bow and arrows to fight the Germans? In the movie, Alan Ritchson's character takes out Nazis with precision using everything from an axe to his trusty bow and arrows. According to the film's co-screenwriter Urash Amel, Anders Lassen did show up with the bow and arrow from his hunting days in Denmark. He brought this very primitive way of killing to a very mechanized war, Amel said. Amel seems to be implying that Lassen used his bow and arrows in combat like in the movie. However, as with most of Amel's other responses in the USA Today interview, they seem to be purposely vague so as not to reveal how much fiction actually is included in the story. According to Damian Lewis's book, it wasn't the case that Lassen used a bow and arrow in combat. However, he did petition the War Office to allow bow and arrows to be used in combat, but they rejected his request. Instead, Lassen only used them in training, which is how he acquired the nickname, the Robin Hood Commando. Anders Lassen was taught how to make his own bow and arrows from a young age. He became so proficient with a bow that he could hit birds in mid-flight. His arrows would reportedly pass through a stag and hit the tree beyond, a detail that the film incorporates when one of his arrows passes through the body of a German soldier and penetrates a tree. In the movie, Anders Lassen is nicknamed the Danish Hammer. In real life, his nickname was the Viking. This is probably a good point to pause and talk about the body count. The number of Nazis that they kill in the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare is on par with Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards. However, that film was not based on a true story, even if some of its characters were loosely inspired by real people. The filmmakers tried to justify this by saying that there were plenty of Nazis killed over the course of all of the missions carried out by the Special Operations Executive. Yes, but this was hundreds of missions, and in the movie, they're cramming it into one operation. In fact, in my research, I don't recall of anyone being killed during Operation Postmaster. Even when they steal the ships, it pretty much went off without a hitch in real life. Don't get me wrong, in a film like this, we definitely need combat, even if it's not historically accurate. And I don't even mind the high body count. After all, it is a Guy Ritchie film. When you make the characters seem so indestructible, it starts to feel like there's not a whole lot at stake, and then the reward feels underwhelming, whether that's surviving another skirmish or completing the mission. For most of the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, I felt like I was watching somebody play a video game on easy mode. I mean, this might work for Henry Cavill's character Gus March-Phillips, since Cavill portrayed Superman, but it's a bit of a bore to watch superheroes take on humans for 2 hours. The only character I can recall getting hurt is Hero Finds Tiffin's character Henry Hayes, whose real name was Graham Hayes, who takes a bullet through the shoulder at the end, to which another character replies, "You have a big hole in your shoulder." But then, a couple scenes later, we see him with Winston Churchill and he appears to be fine. His life meter has been restored to full. I couldn't help but feel that this film didn't quite honor these men, at least not in the way that a film like Saving Private Ryan honored the men who stormed the beaches of Normandy and the hell they went through. For one, we know that our main characters weren't indestructible because they all died on subsequent operations. Gus March-Phillips died several months later in 1942 when he was shot after trying to retreat during Operation Aquatint. Anders Lassen died in 1945 during Operation Roast when he was shot after almost single-handedly taking out 3 enemy positions. Jeffrey Appleyard died in 1943 during Operation Chestnut when a plane he was on disappeared and was presumed to have been shot down. Graham Hayes was part of Operation Aquatint in 1942 with Gus March-Phillips, and when the mission didn't go as planned and they decided to retreat, Hayes was able to escape, and he was hidden by a French family. He eventually made it to the Spanish border, but Spanish border guards turned him over to the Germans, who later executed him. With regard to the characters, Eiza González's character, Marjorie Stewart, takes part in Operation Postmaster in the film. She's depicted as a skilled markswoman who later has to convince the SS officer on the island, Henry Cavill, to attend the party that was thrown to distract the officers while the small-scale raiding force steals the ships. However, Marjorie being included on the mission in the film is fictional. The small-scale raiding force, which was led by Gus March-Phillips, did not have any female members in 1942, and there is no record of Marjorie Stewart being part of Operation Postmaster. At best, it's possible that she may have interacted to some degree with the unit via the broader Special Operations Executive, which oversaw the small-scale raiding force, but that's purely speculation. Marjorie worked in the Special Operations Executive first as a lift operator before rising to the role of secretary to Controller Patrick Howarth. Toward the end of the film, there's a fictional scene where Marjorie is singing at a party thrown to distract the officers. The head SS officer, Heinrich Löhr, portrayed by Till Schweiger, hears her slip up and say something in Yiddish during her performance. It reveals to him that she's Jewish, not German. I found no evidence that Marjorie was Jewish in real life, nor did I find evidence that she had a Latino or Spanish ancestry. In Damian Lewis's book that inspired the film, Marjorie Stewart is only briefly mentioned, and it's in relation to her marriage to Gus March-Phillips, who she had met in January 1942. The book describes Marjorie Stewart as a striking-looking actress who had signed up as an agent with the Special Operations Executive. It states that barely 2 months after his return from Operation Postmaster, March-Phillips married his lovely agent bride. M attended the wedding, as did Appleyard, Hayes, and Lassen, and most of the maid of honor force. There are 2 other characters who take part in Operation Postmaster in the film who are largely fictional. The first is Babs Olusemokun's character, Richard Herron. He is a British secret agent who has established himself as a German-friendly business owner on the island of Fernando Po and operates a casino bar. At best, the character seems to be a replacement for real-life Special Operations Executive Agent Richard Lippett, who helped to prep for Operation Postmaster in Fernando Po, including setting up the party to distract the officers. In the movie, they have some fun with it and depict it as being a costume party. However, in real life, it was a dinner party thrown at Santa Isabel's casino restaurant. Richard Lippett did not operate a casino bar on the island. Instead, for his cover story, he had taken a job with the shipping company John Holt & Company, based out of Liverpool, which had business on the island. Now, if you're going to change Mr. Lippett into a black man in the film, at least be consistent with that character. For example, we see the SS officer torturing a black man on the island. However, he has a pretty good relationship with Mr. Herron because they have a business understanding, which makes sense. However, when we see Mr. Herron on the train, when he encounters an SS officer, that officer who doesn't know him treats him far better than he probably would have in real life. The other largely fictional operator in the movie is explosives expert Freddy Alvarez, portrayed by Henry Golding. Alvarez is needed in part in the film because their initial plan is to sink the ships, including the Italian merchant vessel, the Duchessa d'Aosta, which was supplying the German submarines. In the film, they discover that the hull of the d'Aosta is double-plated, and they're not going to be able to sink it with explosives. So they change the plan at the last minute and decide to steal the ship. However, in real life, their plan was always to steal the ship. They did use explosives to blow up the anchor chains before stealing the 3 ships, which included the Italian merchant vessel Duchessa d'Aosta, the German tug La Comba, and the luxury pleasure yacht Babundi. When the explosions went off, people ran out into the streets and there was a lot of confusion because they actually thought it was an Allied air raid. This is one reason why in real life they weren't fired upon when they stole the ships. The only injuries I can remember reading about with regard to the true story were when 2 of the commandos were thrown back by one of the explosions and they suffered broken ribs. And the only actual fighting that took place was when they rounded up 28 Italian prisoners on the Italian merchant vessel, and several of the more uncooperative ones had to be coshed into submission. To emphasize how unbelievably successful Operation Postmaster went in real life, author Damian Lewis states in his book, "It was fast becoming clear that the seemingly impossible had transpired. Operation Postmaster had been successful beyond anyone's wildest imaginings. The raiders had stolen away the 3 target ships, and while fierce gunfire still illuminated the night sky above the town, not a shot seemed to have been directed their way. Apart from a few bruised and battered Italian captives, they had not caused a single casualty, just as M had called for. The only shot fired by the raiders had been a negligent discharge, a revolver fired accidentally, and no one had been harmed. They eventually surrendered the ships to the HMS Violet, pretending that they were manned by mutinous Italian and German crews. The captain of the Violet was the only person in on the ruse. The scene at the end, where the men are under arrest for disobeying the admiral's orders, and then Winston Churchill unexpectedly shows up to congratulate them by serving them a full-course dinner including lobster, that is all fictional. The co-screenwriter told USA Today, "I don't know if he did that or not, but that's exactly the kind of thing Churchill would have done." If you want to learn more about the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare and how it differs from the true story, check out our article over on historyversushollywood.com that's linked in the description below. As always, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Anchors away, my friends.